Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Joe Biden promised a lot in his first 100 days in office. How much has he delivered? Let's get to the bottom line. If you ever needed proof that time flies, just look at Washington, D.C. In January, we had thousands of diehard fans of Donald Trump scaling the walls of Congress to stop the transfer of power to the guy who actually won the election, Joe Biden. Today, 100 days later, many items on Biden's wish list have been fulfilled. A massive stimulus package was passed, and that put extra cash in the hands of hundreds of millions of Americans. About half of the population has been vaccinated, and now the U.S. is talking about getting the vaccine to other countries that are in worse shape. But some things are much harder to fix. Not one Republican voted for Biden's stimulus package, and all the promises of a new era of bipartisan politics still seem really far-fetched. And for all of Biden's nice talk about reforming the police, about gun control, about immigration, well, there's not much to show for it yet. And then there's climate change, and there's infrastructure, there's health, there's education, and don't forget foreign policy. Today, we're giving the president a report card on his first 100 days in office, and we're talking to two great people. Liz Mair, a former spokesperson and communication official for the Republican National Committee, and Josh Marshall, editor and publisher of the progressive media site Talking Points Memo, known as TPM. Let me just start out with you, Liz. When you are grading Joe Biden, what comes up as the most important steps that he has taken that you think he's moving the needle, and what hasn't he done?
Okay, so I think when we're looking at Joe Biden, I think the two most important things that we're grading him on, and the two things that are most important to the electorate are, number one, how's he doing with regard to COVID response? And number two, how's he doing at not beating Donald Trump, right? Because at the end of the day, a lot of people simply voted for him because he was not Donald Trump. So I think on the first front, with regard to the Donald Trump point, obviously he's doing very well. There's a strong contrast. I think everybody gets that. Amongst other things, we have a president now who we don't have to think about all the time. I think that's a pretty major contrast. When you're looking at COVID response, it also seems that we're doing pretty well. The U.S. is doing very well when you compare to the rest of the world with regard to our vaccination rates. Obviously, our case numbers aren't great, but as herd immunity is approached, I think those are going to come down. The one caveat that I would offer to this is that Joe Biden has a habit of setting benchmarks and targets rather low to a point where they should be easily met or exceeded. And so I think in some cases, he's kind of allowing himself to be graded on a particularly favorable curve, and we'll see how long that works out. My personal view is that the electorate may sort of start tiring of that or may start factoring that into their assessments of how he's doing. When I ask friends and family, they keep telling me, look, as long as he continues to not be Donald Trump, he can basically do whatever the heck he wants.
Josh, I mean, I'd love to get your take on it, but I mean, one of the thoughts that comes to me is Donald Trump had won the election. You know, would we have had kind of, Final Four, West Virginia, Georgia, various states competing, and if, the winners get the COVID vaccines. But I'd be interested to know what, you think about, the Biden picture, where you think he's winning, where you think he's losing.
Well, there's a lot I agree with Liz about. I think, the two main things out of the gate are just returning some semblance of normalcy and perhaps just stability, kind of affective stability to the White House, and just in the way that in the United States the presidency sort of casts a sets a tone, casts a pall over the country. And if you have someone like Donald Trump, who's president, that is just a very destabilizing, wild kind of thing. And people were clearly ready to be done with that. I think even a number of Trump supporters were kind of ready to be done with that. The other overwhelming thing is COVID. I think that I would disagree a little bit with Liz that I think, when he made the projection of 100 million shots in people's arms in the first 100 days, a lot of people didn't think that was going to be possible, or it was a stretch. He's doubled that. So that is going well for him. He got through the COVID relief package, which not only did a lot on the immediate COVID front, it also addressed a lot of things that people from his party were interested in, found very important. I think the main thing that he is succeeding with so far, which was perhaps not easy to predict, is that he is right there with a lot of the most forward-leaning elements, youngest elements of his party, and matching a lot of things that they have wanted, putting those on the table. He's gotten some of them passed already in the COVID relief bill. Some of it's coming up with this jobs and infrastructure plan. He has managed to do that and basically stay about as on the right side of public opinion in the country at large as is possible in the polarized era that we live in. We'll kind of take that for granted now, and I think one could argue from a progressive left perspective, well, a lot of these things were always pretty popular, you know, and that's how he's able to do it. He's done some of those things. He's pushed hard on some of those things. Some he's hung back from, and there's just, you know, there's something very odd and improbable about this sort of late life act of Joe Biden's. This is not, you know, at almost any point in Joe Biden's career, which goes back 50 years in American politics, this is not something someone would have ever have predicted, that he's, you know, that he is this, well, at least trying to be a kind of an FDR, LBJ type presidential figure, and in many ways, at least in the initial months, is having some luck at it.
Well, I find it a fascinating depiction, Liz, that Joe Biden, whom we've all known, I mean, everybody in Washington has known Joe Biden, right? They've known him for decades. And he was a guy who ran for president, you know, any number of times, didn't quite make it, you know, basically was vice president of the United States and told by the president, Obama, essentially to, you know, take a pass while Hillary Clinton tried to run. This is somebody coming in who's sort of, you know, many people perceive to win at the margins. And as Josh said, to now look at him trying to do something on the scale of the New Deal or the Great Society, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson. I'm interested in how you see it. Do conservatives look at Joe Biden as potentially that consequential?
I don't know. I think that that's an open question. I'm not sure that we're far enough in for conservatives to really have a settled view. I think that there are a lot of conservatives, and I would point out that I call myself a libertarian, not a conservative, so I'm not quite on the same page as them with this. I think a lot of conservatives have been slightly surprised at how progressive Biden has been. I think what they expected to see was that he would be ideologically moderate, but dispositionally a little bit more out there. And in fact, what they're seeing is kind of the reverse. Now, for those of us who have had to pay more attention to Biden, and I would count myself among them, since he was Obama's vice presidential nominee in 2008, and that's when I was at the RNC, so I was going through reams and reams of information about him. I'm not terribly surprised by this, nor am I terribly surprised about where he's ended up and the trajectory of his career and the fact that, yes, he's very, very old, it's true, but that he has achieved success at this point in his life. But I think probably compared to the majority of the electorate, I'm an outlier there. So we'll wait and see kind of where conservatives come down on him. I think that at the moment, the thing that's really interesting to me is that I think on some things he actually appears to be far more left-leaning than President Obama was. But he just doesn't really enrage conservatives to nearly the degree that President Obama did. And I'm sure that Josh has many theories as to why that might be. But I think it's very interesting because he's probably going to be in a position to get away with a little bit more than what people had expected.
I'm also...
I would say he is on almost every front, not just some things with Obama. I think one would be hard-pressed to find any major facet of policy or politics in which Joe Biden in 2021 is not to the left of President Obama basically at any time during his presidency.
Which is remarkable. I mean, I think it's go ahead, Liz. I think it's a remarkable comment that Josh just shared, that when you do, you know, even along foreign policy lines, you think about economic policy, you think about minimum wage, you think about climate. Of course, you know, Obama was there on climate, but I think in that area of you know, looking at where they are on the scale, Biden does seem to come out on the left side. Liz?
I think that's generally correct. But I think that one thing that's a little bit different is I think that Biden, from his years of experience in Washington, D.C., He hasn't really, as you've noted, succeeded in getting bipartisan votes on things yet. He did promise to put a Republican in his cabinet, then didn't do it, doesn't have a lot of high-ranking Republicans. But I think one thing that's different between him and Obama that actually does make him look a little bit more moderate is that while the policy that he's pushing is much more left-leaning by and by, I think in general he has proved a lot more willing to conduct sort of basic outreach and try to do some appealing to Republicans. So that started, I think, during the campaign with a lot of outreach to suburban Republican women who weren't going to vote for Trump, didn't want to vote for Trump, needed an excuse to vote for him. But I also think, when you look at his career and his record of deal cutting and that kind of thing, I can kind of see how he ends up with more success, because I think where Obama had this sort of ethos about him of being a little bit superior, coming off to people as being a little bit egotistical, a little bit aloof, Biden really doesn't have that. And so I think that that's something that that is important to take note of. It doesn't necessarily affect the policy, but I think dispositionally he's probably a little bit more inclined towards things that look middle of the road than what Obama was.
Josh, I'm trying to think of the chamber when the president is speaking to a joint session of Congress, giving a State of the Union address, talking about the various boxes he's checked off, climate change, or, dealing with, getting leaders together to look at that, the American Recovery Act, looking at what he's going to do on infrastructure. But another dimension of that is foreign policy. And he sent basically his two top national security officials to be tough on China, to have a very candid talk on China. I thought he was going to be much more focused on the domestic, less on the international, but he's been able to kind of chew and or I should say walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm interested in whether that chamber is going to find moments where he was tough on Putin, tough on Xi Jinping, and you'll get the whole chamber applauding his foreign policy. What do you think?
I think it's possible. I mean, for the reasons we all know, Russia is a very complicated, multivalent issue in American politics now. Obviously, you sort of have both parties moving in similar directions, looking at the contest between the U.S. and China. So that's possible. There's a lot of ways that China policy has become deeply connected with domestic policy in the United States because of COVID, because of trade issues, because of lots of different things. I think on the point we were making about Biden versus Obama, one thing worth remembering is that in many ways Biden got the job as vice president precisely because he seemed too old to ever to run again. So it was much as Bush had with Dick Cheney, sort of disrupting that model of the vice president being, having kind of future political interests of their own. The big thing about Joe Biden, in my mind, is Joe Biden has always been a consensus Democrat. He will basically be where the Democratic Party is, kind of wherever it goes. And so in that sense, I agree with Liz. It does not surprise me greatly that this is where he has ended up. I was telling a lot of people in kind of intra-Democratic Party discussions, during the primaries that this is where I thought that where I thought that he would be. Look, there's some obvious things with Joe Biden. Look, Joe Biden is old. He's an old white Catholic man who has a very kind of genial personality. Even people who are trying to demonize him now have a hard time getting past that. Barack Obama was a young black man with a foreign-sounding name rooted in Arabic. These are very different people, right? It's not surprising to me at all that things. He is a different person. American politics reacts to those two different kinds of people differently. I think that's just, that is just obvious. The other thing is, and this is one of those examples of sometimes a flawed person, we're all flawed, but sometimes a flawed person meets their moment. And the kind of a signature thing about Joe Biden through his political career has been the politics of empathy. And at many points in our history, that is of only limited political, currency. political resonance. He managed to become president, though, in a period where it was a central grounding aspect of a political personality, both because of COVID and because he was succeeding a man whose signature characteristic was a radical lack of empathy and a signature of predation. So in many ways, there are things about Joe Biden, he moves with the party ideologically, but there are things about him as a person which gave him particular grounding, particular resonance, particular ability to sort of connect with people that's unique to right now.
Another bit of the drama in America these last few years has been police issues, policing. We had the death of George Floyd. We've had, efforts on the table on gun reform and also other dimensions of regulation in that space, but also broadly. As a libertarian, what does that do for you? Is that something that gives you certain concern?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag. On the policing stuff, I'm sure that overall I probably tend to align more with where most Democrats are on that. I'm somebody who's always been very skeptical of government power in all of its forms. As a younger person, a teenager growing up in Seattle, I certainly had negative interactions with the police. So I don't think that that's something that's confined to African-American males. But it's something that certainly makes me very empathetic to the situation that they find themselves in pretty much every single day when they're interacting with law enforcement, right? So I certainly think that the direction that people seem to be going in on that front is a good one. I think Biden in particular, the fact that he's rejected a lot of the proposals to sort of defund the police and a lot of the stuff that seems to be coming from the hard left and the sort of, Sanders-nistas and the Democratic Socialists of the world, I think is smart. In fact, he seems to be talking about putting more money into policing so that you can have better training to actually address some of these underlying issues. I think that's something that's fairly appealing to me as a libertarian, even though I don't like spending the money. When it comes to the gun control debate, I'm quite sure whatever he puts forward, I'm going to want to projectile vomit across the room, and I'll probably be mouthing off on Twitter about it for Josh and everybody else to see all day long. But, that's also been true, I would say, with regard to what he's done on immigration. I certainly prefer where he is on immigration to Donald Trump. But as somebody who's very, very pro-immigration, my problem with Joe Biden is I'm one of those people who would fall into the disapprove of the job he's doing segment in a poll, but not because I think he's not deporting enough people or he's not being, tough and border security minded enough. I think he's actually kept too much of what Trump did put on the books. And I think that it's going to cause him problems long term. It's already causing him problems, both substantively and in terms of political optics. So, he's going to be a mixed bag. Certainly the amount of spending I'm not happy with. Probably a lot of the regulation I'm not going to be happy with. We'll see what actually happens on taxes. I'm always a little bit incredulous that Democrats get what they want on taxes. But there are some good things here for sure.
Hey, listen, in the last few minutes, Senator Marco Rubio has said that he is not going to attend the joint session of Congress, some issue about seating. But Senator Joe Manchin will be there, who is a moderate member or the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, if you will. And Senator Manchin has been a guest before on The Bottom Line. But I sometimes wonder if Joe Manchin were not there, would Joe Biden need to create him? Because he does create a different kind of dynamic in the party. A lot of Democrats are very frustrated. I'd love to get both of your, snapshots, on the role and presence and meaning of Joe Manchin in these times.
Well, it's funny. I would say it's possible that Joe Biden would need to invent him because he does allow him to sort of, create some kind of leverage back and forth, right, with these different wings of the party that so far he's done a pretty good job, kind of holding together with him. The real people who would need to invent him are probably the 7 or 8 Democrats who, in a lot of these cases, have similar qualms on issues of substance and in some cases on these kind of, meta issues of, filibuster, bipartisanship, all, collegiality, all this kind of stuff. Because it's clear, I mean, you have Kristen Sinema, who, to my mind at least, is often just up there for the optics, right? To kind of position herself in this, what she finds to be her sweet spot in Arizona, a kind of a, a blue trending purple state. But you've clearly got, whether it's minimum wage or, a corporate tax hike or all sorts of different issues, you've clearly got, as I said, 7 or 8 other Democrats who are kind of happy to not be the one taking the incoming on Twitter, basically, but still having him kind of run that.
Joe Manchin's willing
that
to
interference.
take that. Yeah, he's just anchored right there.
Well, and it's for him, as he says very openly sometimes, having the left wing of his party coming after him is good for him in West Virginia. And even though some of them don't realize it, no one's ever going to have a primary against him. So he's the one who, paradoxically, it's good for, whereas maybe a Mark Warner or Bennett, just one of these guys, it's not great for them. So they let him take it.
Liz, let me get a quick snapshot from you on the role and meaning of Senator Joe Manchin.
Well, I think that generally people tend to sort of step into this role if there's a void, right? I mean, a couple years ago, we certainly wouldn't have thought of Senator Mitt Romney potentially being like the swing votes on anything in the Senate and being a moderate, right? He would have just been considered a bog standard mainstream conservative. But, fast forward and here we are. So I think that when you have a void, people do tend to step into it and fill it. But yeah, Joe Manchin is a fascinating political character, and I agree with a lot of what Josh said. When you go back and you look at everything that happened surrounding minimum wage, there was this whole discussion about how this was all about the filibuster. And in actual fact, it wasn't. It was totally about Tester, Sinema, Mark Kelly, right? All of these moderate Democrats who were absolutely not going to go for $15 minimum wage. But Joe Manchin was the one who sort of stood out front on that and took a lot of fire. I do sort of wonder if you're somebody like Tester, though, in Montana, potentially being seen as being kind of Manchinite, maybe would be beneficial to him. I think the difference is that Joe Manchin, having had the lengthy political career that he has in West Virginia, I did an experiment once when I was out in West Virginia. I went through a Cracker Barrel, and I went through and I asked every single table what people thought of Joe Manchin. And I think because of the lengthy political career that he has there and the name recognition he has, he does have some capacity to get away with things in West Virginia, whereas probably Tester doesn't actually have exactly that same standing. Maybe in like 8 years, maybe we'll find he does, but he might not be there quite yet.
I have been into some of those same Cracker Barrels in West Virginia, and I have kind of largely felt the same thing. There's been a great discussion. Just really fast, we have the president going to be speaking to the nation. We're a little bit more than 3 months in. What grade would you give Joe Biden, Josh?
I'd say A or A minus. I think that given the range of challenges, not just in policy terms, but also kind of keeping his rather fractured party together with him, it's hard for me to think how he could have realistically done much better than he has at this point.
And Liz, your grade?
I'm going to say incomplete, and there are 2 reasons why. Number one, big issue for me.
I didn't know that was an option.
It's always an option for me. I'm a libertarian. I create my own rules. He has not done what he promised to do with regard to refugee numbers. He is currently still holding at that Trump number. They are saying that they will reverse that within about a month, but until they do, I can't give him anything other than an incomplete. And the other thing that's very important, probably for your viewers in particular, is he still has a ton of ambassadorships that have yet to be filled.
Absolutely right.
I'm a little bit shocked when you look at, the U.S. doesn't have an ambassador to the European Union. That's crazy, 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 crazy. And I say that as, somebody who's British and have just had to, give away the European Union, right? But it's a huge trading bloc. It's a huge economic bloc. And the fact that we don't have that position filled yet, I think that that's a little bit of an oversight on his part, a pretty significant one. I know he's had his hands busy, but my goodness. So until he gets those 2 things done for me, he's continuing to get an incomplete.
Terrific conversation. So there we have it. We have, A minus and an incomplete. We'll be back with both of you again, I'm sure, to take the measure of the Biden administration, later on in its tenure. Communication strategist Liz Mair, journalist Josh Marshall, thank you both so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So what's the bottom line? Maybe the most important change we've noticed isn't the trillions of dollars that are pouring into the economy to end the pandemic or fix America's infrastructure, or the great competition between Washington and Beijing on the world stage. Maybe it's got nothing to do with money and power for now. I think it's the temperature. Not the temperature of global warming, but the political temperature in America, where every new policy initiative from the White House would start a new round of culture wars, or where every American looked at their neighbors with suspicion, wondering if they were quietly destroying the country. The reality is that the Trump era is slowly receding, although it's impossible to measure precisely. It's just a feeling. But it's kind of a good feeling, better than constant rage, as President Trump himself once said he was trying to provoke. For now, a decrease in toxicity, a lowering of the political heat, well, it's a good first start. And that's the bottom line.